It's wonderful to see all of you. It's wonderful to be all together in this somewhat unusual fashion. And, you know, clearly we are wishing very much that the real Rabbi Minna Bromberg was in our space and we were really able to give her that hug. But this is the closest thing. And I think there's something really quite remarkable about being taught by someone sitting in Yerushalayim right now, right? In what I'm told is a very cool apartment, by the way. So another reason why we have to go and visit sometime soon. In a moment, our wonderful Ruth Joseph is going to help, and I think Leah is going to help as well to introduce Minna properly. So I'm really here today, mostly just, again, as a very honored rabbi of a community that I adore, and one that I think possesses some really remarkable teachers and leaders, and a program that we have seen develop over the last few years into one of the most important programs in our temple, the Women's Torah Commentary, and its usage in really teaching in so many ways that have pushed our Torah study further, our community further, and some remarkable people who've made that happen, and certainly Ruth Joseph and Leah Oppenheimer, and a very proud Margaret Bromberg, while watching grandkids, envisioned something for us. And I think actually what I hope will become something that many communities will take up, which is both to utilize and to see the value and the remarkable gift that is the Women's Torah Commentary in and of itself, the physical book itself, but also I think in supporting and pushing forward the concept and the ideas behind its creation. And I think that Rabbi Minna, who has prepared so beautifully for today, and again, if you haven't seen the newspaper article, you must read it. Really, all of these things come together in a way that I think all of us should be inspired by and moved by. And I really am just really privileged to be a part of it, and to be a part of a community that I think embodies so many of these wonderful values. So just as a reminder, like I said, I'm going to be really more your tech support for today, if anything else, pushing buttons on my end. So if you have any trouble or any questions, you can certainly chat directly to me and I'll do my best to help. And certainly to our leaders and presenters, again, same principle, Rabbi, I'm yours. I will help any way, shape, or form. You are all muted currently. I know that knowing Minna will probably have a little bit of opportunity for some engagement, so we'll give you the power to unmute when the time is appropriate. But if I see anybody acting out of sorts, I will be merciless in my muting, I assure you. So on that end, you know, Ruth, I just put away, I can't remember who's next on our agenda. I'm sorry, I just put it away. Is it you or is it Leah?
Well, I'm going to introduce, Leah has been responsible for making the arrangements for Minna's appearance and for communicating with her, and we are grateful very grateful to Leah. And I'm going to let her do the introductions. I just wanted to welcome everyone and to bring good wishes from our president, Ron Klausner, who is on his way to Africa right now, but he did email me last evening to acknowledge that Minna would be here today and sent his best wishes for a great event. But with that, I'm going to, I also just very briefly want to thank our wonderful Rabbi Dan Geffen, who has been very supportive right from the beginning of the idea of women leading Torah study regularly, monthly, and of these special events, our Scholars in Residence and Master Teachers programs. So thank you for that, Dan. You've been very supportive and we appreciate it. Okay, Leah, it's all yours. You have to unmute. Can't hear you.
Okay, here we go. Leah, all right, so hi everybody, how are you? Welcome. Minna and I go back quite a ways. This is actually almost the anniversary of my son's bar mitzvah. He did Parsha Beshalach and had the biggest blizzard happen on his bar mitzvah day that I had ever experienced up to that date. And everyone went home early from the reception, or they spent the rest of the being locked in with snowdrifts with us. So it was quite eventful. And Minna I got to know Minna really well during his training. I think I enjoyed his training more than he did. And we've stayed close ever since. She is not only the daughter of Margaret Bromberg, which already makes her important, but she's really formed a unique view of Torah that every time I hear her talk or sing, or I read something she writes, I'm just so excited I can hardly contain myself. The last time I read one of her blogs from Fat Torah, I said, "Why doesn't everyone like this? I don't get it. It's so cool. You know how I get when I'm enthusiastic." But aside from her current work, which is really important, she really knows her text. And we were able to talk about Beshalach, even the intonations of the laning had a meaning. And when, I don't know if you've all experienced it, but when Minna reads Torah, you can understand simply from the notes and the way her voice goes up and down and does its thing, what's going on in the story. Her voice tells Torah. And that's really amazing without even knowing the Hebrew. If you just know the plot, it's like going to Puccini. You can figure out the story just from what's happening in the music. It's very exciting. And so we're going to let music lead us to a little bit more empowerment, which God knows we really need. As you know, Minna lives in Jerusalem with her 2 children and her husband, Rabbi Allen. She got her smika at Hebrew College, right? Yes, Hebrew College. She got a PhD at Northwestern in sociology. I mean, she's awesome. I just happen to idealize people who really study, so take it with whatever you want to take it with, but I love her very much. So, Minna, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you so much. It is so delightful to be with you. If you didn't see on my Facebook, I was writing about how excited I was to be getting to teach in my hometown, even though I miss actually being able to be in Sag Harbor, of course. That is a sad thing. I will tell you that I'll try to limit my cute kid stories, but I will say that my son was born in December, just before the pandemic started, and so we haven't been able to get to Sag Harbor since then. And that means that other than his actual 3 living grandparents, none of my family has met him. None of our family has met him. And so Bernice, who's now almost 6 years old, about a year ago, when we were talking about whether we were going to get to see people, etc., she said, "Well, they're going to be so surprised." And they're just going to be more and more surprised because, of course, now he's a 2-year-old. And so, in any case, I miss you. I miss being able to be with you, and I'm really delighted that the wonders of Zoom make it possible for at least to hear each other's voices and see each other's faces. So we are going to be talking today about one of my favorite parts of the Torah, which is called Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, especially appropriate also for Sag Harbor. And of course, you will be shocked to know that I am going to start with song. And I wouldn't be surprised if this melody is familiar to some of you. I'm going to share my screen so you can have the words too, even though, of course, one of the sad things about Zoom is that we can't actually sing together. So we're going to talk about this whole wall of text, literally wall of text in a bit, but right now we're just going to focus on this excerpt from the Song of the Sea, which also shows up in a different form in the Book of Psalms. Ozi v'zimrat ya vayihili lishua. This is a melody by Rabbi Shefa Gold. Ozi v'zimrat ya vayihili lishua. Ozi v'zimrat ya vayihili lishua. Ozi v'zimrat וזמרדיה ויהי לי לישועה עוזי וזמרדיה ויהי לי לישועה. So I'm really especially glad that we have an expansive bit of time to be together. And I want to tell you a little bit about the journey we're going to go on. We're going to start by looking at the Song of the Sea itself. And I'll give you a sense of what it is and when we read it and why we're talking about it right now. And then we're going to zoom in on Miriam, on the prophetess Miriam, and talk more about her role, both in terms of the Song of the Sea and also what we can glean from that about what I've started thinking of as a leadership of belonging, and thinking about how each of us, no matter what our sort of official role in a community is, or in a family or in a self, can really use our voices to create more and more belonging for ourselves and for each other. So we're going to start with just some basics. Okay, so the Song of the Sea. First of all, I want to say something about this week. Just scrolling so that we get to a wall of Hebrew text. Here it is. This week's Torah portion is called B'Shalach, as Leah said. And but this Shabbat, this upcoming Shabbat, is also called Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of song, because of this song that we're going to look at. So it can be hard to tell this sometimes when we're reading Torah in synagogue. Not every bit of biblical poetry that's in Torah has a special melody, although this one does, and we'll say more about that later. But we know that in the text of Torah itself, we have both prose and poetry, or song. So one thing to say just right from the beginning is that the Hebrew word for song, which is shir or shirah, there's no word to distinguish song and poetry in Hebrew, which isn't to say that people don't talk about the difference between songs and poems that don't have music with them, but just know that that word shir and shirah is used interchangeably to mean things that you actually sing out loud and the song or poem that you read on the page. And one thing that we know about biblical poetry from the folks who like to look at Bible from a critical, historical, literary perspective, is that the poetry parts of the text of Torah are thought to be some of the most ancient parts of the Torah, meaning that they were probably carried in oral form. Who knows how many generations before anyone thought to write down any words of Torah. And this song in particular is suspected to be really at one of the earliest layers of Torah. It's one of the oldest songs that we have. And the song comes in Shmot, in the book of Exodus, just after the narrative description of the crossing of the Red Sea. So, so the last few weeks in our Torah portions, we've been reading about God remembering that there are people there in Egypt who are crying out from the bondage that they're suffering from, and calling on Moses to do his part to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And we just got through all the plagues somehow. And here we are at the actual going out of Egypt itself, Yetziat Mitzrayim. And just after the narrative of how that works, we have this song. We are going to look at the words of the song. But first I want to say a little bit about sort of where the song is in the text and also how it's used in Jewish liturgical context. So what I have here, yes, can you all see my screen? Am I actually sharing properly? Yeah, okay, great. Generally speaking, the Song of the Sea itself is thought of as running from Exodus chapter 15, verse 1 to Exodus chapter 15, verse 18. You are already, if you are a regular synagogue goer, you're already familiar with the most popular quote from the book of from the Song of the Sea, which is the quote "Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'koach, noati lo tosef eleh." So that whole little chunk that we sometimes just call the Mi chamocha is actually from the Song of the Sea, and the song itself. So we hear that little snippet of the song whenever we get to that part of our morning or evening prayer services. There's also a tradition in many Jewish communities to actually have the Song of the Sea as part of the daily morning prayers. So in a traditional, particularly you sort of hear it more, I guess, and I guess that's not true. I'm questioning myself here. Some people might make more of it in a weekday than on Shabbat. Some people might make more of it on Shabbat, but in any case, in a traditional prayer book, it shows up right at the end of Sukkei de Zimra, right at the end of the verses of song that are said before the sort of calling everyone together into prayer in its entirety. It's sung or recited or mumbled, depending on your community, in its entirety, the Song of the Sea. And so certainly in contexts where people are regularly praying together and including this in their liturgy, it's also just something that people have a lot of, just sort of on their tongues and at their fingertips in terms of familiarity. What we're going to talk about for sort of the second half of our time together is that after this Song of the Sea in the text, there's a shorter song, which some people think is even more ancient, which is called Miriam's Song. And it's just a verse or two, and we're going to talk much more about that in the second half, but it really is sort of all tied up with the longer Song of the Sea itself. And so we're going to start by looking at that longer Song of the Sea. One interesting thing to note, so I also just want to say that you are welcome. I'm definitely going to be breaking for Q&A, and I'm also going to be giving you a little bit of time in breakout rooms to look at some text together. But absolutely, if you have questions going along, especially if there's something that I'm saying that's not making sense, please do put it in the chat. And I'm happy to take any questions along the way. Okay, so there are a couple of distinctive things about this chunk of Torah text. One of them is the way it looks in the Torah scroll. So if you've ever seen a Torah scroll, it's mostly written in columns that, if you were typesetting, you would say they were justified, right? Where the text generally goes all the way from the right-hand edge to the left-hand edge of a given column. And there are a couple of places where that's not true. And if you're rolling through a Torah scroll, you can sort of see them pop up, and it's one way to know where you are in the Torah, but it's also this really amazing scribal tradition of writing Torah scrolls with some pieces that have a particularly special way of laying it out. And so here is the traditional layout of the Song of the Sea in an actual Torah scroll. Everyone see that? So there are, as you might imagine, many, many ideas about why in the world the tradition is to write a Torah scroll this way, with Song of the Sea appearing this way. One tradition is to think of this as being like a pattern of brickwork. You see how you could imagine that the text is sort of like bricks that don't lay right on top of each other, but you have sort of two coming like this and then one in the middle. And so one imaginative way of thinking about this is that it's imagining that the floor of the sea, when the people, right, the text says that the people walked through the sea on dry land. And so there's sort of this imagining that perhaps it's written this way because the dry land that they were walking on was like brickwork, that it was just a paved pathway through the sea. So that's one interpretation. And if any of you have heard other interpretations of why it's written this way, I very much love to hear them. So please do chat them up. So that's how it's laid out. That's what it actually looks like visually. And then it also, as Leah was mentioning, also actually has a special melody. So I'm going to go back up. Apologies if it makes you dizzy to see text scrolling by. It has a special melody that's different than the regular Shabbat morning Torah trope, that's used for the Song of the Sea and also for a couple of other verses actually in the book of Numbers. And sometimes this is referred to as the traveling melody. Because it's used for times that are talking about sort of the people all moving together. So in this case, moving through the walls of the sea, so that's why it's called the traveling melody. So it's used here, and then also for a couple of verses in the book of Numbers. And I'm going to just do a little snippet of it for you, just so you can see what that sounds like. Like losing my English is becoming Hebrew grammared, even though my Hebrew not necessarily improving at the same pace. Anyway, so you can see what it sounds like. So the first part, basically the way it works is that anytime there is a name of God mentioned in the Song of the Sea, it uses this special melody. And the special melody sounds like this. So I'm going to give it a little run up just so you can hear the difference. Right, so this first verse here would just be Az Yashir Moshe Uvenei Yisrael Et Hashira Hazot Ladonai Vayomru Lemor. So all of that just said, then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to God, and here's what they said. Right, so all of that was sort of the little intro that the song gets, and then the song itself starts right here with the word Ashira. And the melody sounds like this. Ashira ladonai ki gaoga sus faroch v'oramavayam ozi v'zimrat yavayhi lishua ze livan vehu elo yaviv aromenu. And it goes on from there. And I'll sing you also the part that is the words of Mi Chamocha, so you get a sense of what that sounds like. And as you might imagine, there are different versions of what this melody sounds like in different communities. So there are different ways of singing it. So here's Mi Chamocha. Oh, okay. So here's Mi Chamocha. Oh, here it is. Which of course we have many melodies for, and we'll talk more about that later as well. But when we chant it as part of our Torah reading next Shabbat for Shabbat Shira, when this parsha is read, it sounds like this: Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, noratirot osefelen. So that is sort of, you can think of it as sort of the in a world of many melodies for Mi Chamocha. That's an old one and used in the context of chanting this text itself. The song itself, does anyone who feels like reading? Because we can certainly read through the text of the song itself. Wants to read? You don't have to read the whole thing. You could read a few verses. Leah, you're. Well, do I have to unmute people, or can you unmute yourself?
I took away the sort of ability to unmute.
Sorry.
But
Sorry.
you should be able to just pick whoever you want and say ask to unmute it. It should work. And if you have any problems, then I can open it.
Okay. Leah's going to read. Yes, please.
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him. The God of my father, and I will exalt him. The Lord, the warrior, Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the water piled up. The flood stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. The foe said, I will pursue. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword. My hand shall subdue them. You made your wind blow. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples hear, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone, till your people cross over, O Lord, till your people cross, whom you have ransomed. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord. The sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established. The Lord will reign forever and ever.
Thank you. I would love to hear just any reactions that anyone has to the text itself. And I'm actually going to stop sharing just so that I can see you all more easily.
Okay, so Rabbi, I gave the permission to people to unmute themselves now, so you can call on people and they can unmute, and I'll help if needed.
Okay, great. So anyone who would like to speak, you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and start talking. And if it becomes a madhouse, then I'll figure it out. Just how the text itself, how hearing the text itself strikes you. Janet. Oh, you need to unmute. Try to unmute yourself and see if it works. If not, I can unmute you. Yep, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
You know, it's hard to think of the Lord as a warrior. It's hard. And, you know, for us in this time and place. And yes, these things are necessary, you know. So that's just my reaction. And it's hard for me.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else from the text itself? Yes, Leah. Oh, we still need to unmute.
Yesterday, we talked about how God has a double thing going on during the portion of both Bo and now we see Bishalach. We hear this again. God's working to liberate the people, but he's also got his eye on what Instagram is saying down in Egypt. You know, it's not just about saving the Israelites. It's also about squashing Pharaoh and his minions forever and ever, so that everyone on the multimedia trajectory of the Mediterranean, this little corner of the Mediterranean, is going to sit up and take notice. Yeah. And here we see a continuation of yesterday for anyone that was here with us.
Right. So God is very concerned for God's reputation.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I can add and kind of relate to what Janet says, because I remember hearing this story as a child and being very distraught over the image that came to my mind of all these chariots and people drowning and getting killed. And it was very difficult for me to celebrate the destruction of Pharaoh's people, because there was no mention of, and then they were transformed, or then they, it was, and I remember, my parents being so excited about how happy they were that the Jews won. And that was always very difficult for me. There was very little mention of compassion for those that were destroyed or whatever. So I guess being a sensitive kid, I just recall that, it bothered me for years. The image of the sea engulfing all these living beings.
Yeah. I mean, it is a terrifying image. And I think two things come to mind from what all of you are saying so far. One is, do you remember the movie Prince of Egypt? There was I think it was a Disney movie that came out, I want to say 20-ish years ago, that, told the story of Moses and I saw it when I was living in Chicago. That's why I think I know what it was. I was sitting in front of a father and his maybe 6-year-old kid. I'm not sure I would take my 6-year-old to see Prince of Egypt, but different parenting styles. They got to the last plague. The plagues in the Prince of Egypt are like amazingly done. If you're ever looking for sort of a visual animation of the plagues, it's quite amazing animation. And so the plague of the slaying of the firstborn is really, really quite moving and sad. And this little boy says to his father, "Did Pharaoh die?" And his father, which still brings tears to my eyes, and certainly did at the time. I'm sitting there in the movie theater and I hear the father say, "Oh no, it's much worse. His son died." Right. So just that sense that this has always been something that I think that ought to, whether we think of ourselves as sensitive or not, that ought to also have an element of heartbreak to it. And I think that the religion itself is also sensitive to that. So some of you may be familiar with the Midrash, the interpretive teaching, that says that after Pharaoh and his army were drowned in the sea, that the angels wanted to sing. And God stops them from singing and says, "How can you sing when my children are drowning?" Right, so we have sort of this, losing it here, right? We have this in the tradition, right? Both this like clear victory song, right? That's very much, this can't be thought of as anything other really, I think, than a victory song. And also this interpretive tradition, quite ancient, not as ancient as the song itself, right? But that recognizes also the heartbreaking human element of this, that really ought to be inescapable. Rivlin.
For the first time, I noticed the phrase, "This is the pick of the best of the soldiers."
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the victory dance, or victory song. And it's war. It's presented, we're not fighting the civilians. It's forgotten about the death of the firstborn. It's like, this is the victory. They were soldiers. They knew what they were doing. And this is a military battle that we won. So I think that really shifts the emphasis away from the death of the firstborn and just reminding that it is a military victory.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, Mom, Diane.
Myself?
There you go. Oh, wait, you did, and then it stopped.
Oh,
There.
okay. I'm on my phone, so it acts in a different way than I used to. But I think we also have to consider that not everyone was guilty. So even though they were our enemies, people died and were affected, even though they weren't responsible for what happened. And that's really heartbreaking when you see the destruction of what happened. it's as God said, we can't rejoice because they are my children. And that really, struck me when I was reading it again, and I guess that's what happens in war. I mean, people that are not guilty perish through no fault of their own.
Any other responses?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Any other responses to the text itself? Yes, Emily.
Well, I was always struck throughout the Torah and also in the Psalms, which I read very often, how much is centered around military victory of David and Joshua. So this reflects, what I see throughout the Torah, and it's hard to deal with it, but it's everywhere. This triumph, military triumph.
Yeah.
The Jews.
Right. I mean, I think it's interesting that this particular piece is being described as military triumph, because there's certain, when you talk about David and Joshua, there certainly are, and the Maccabees, right? There certainly are military victories, and in other words, victories in which the Jews or the Hebrews or wherever we were at the time, take up arms against their enemy. What's interesting here is that it's very much a military victory song, but we were not fighting with any kind of sword. We were running away. Is what we were doing, right? And it's in this particular case, it's God's victory, right? And so God is described as being a warrior, but it's fascinating that we have the sense of it as a military victory, and it's sort of being celebrated that way, even though it's God's military victory and not actually that that we were fighting anyone. Yes, Ruth.
Yes, I was going to say, just on that point, there's no mention really of a liberation. We're celebrating, liberation of this whole people, 600,000 plus. That was just the warriors.
Yeah.
People who were enslaved, and now they are. This is their step toward freedom, their major step toward freedom. Crossing that sea, in a sense, that's the boundary between slavery and freedom. It's really a celebration, and yet it, as you point out, it's a military song, a song of military victory, as opposed to a song of liberation.
Yeah. And this comes to be used in the tradition, in the midrashic tradition, right, in the rabbinic tradition of interpretive commentary on Torah. This comes to be used actually as a model of victory song. What I mean by that is that then when we get into the prophets, there are other times when there's the sense that the pattern ought to be that when we experience a miraculous military victory, that what we owe God is song, which is an interesting thing to think of, right? That what we owe God is song. And there's in fact an instance in the prophets when there's a whole little story about a king who fails to offer song, and bad things happen, right? He also experiences this sort of unexpected, with the help of God, rescue from a bad military situation. And he doesn't offer song. And the rabbis, the rabbinic commentary on that actually says that if only he, this king, had offered song like he was supposed to, right, in the pattern that we learned from the Song of the Sea, the Messiah would have already come. This real sense that sort of the failure to offer song in that case is a failure that has, consequences in terms of the fate of the people. So I want to say one other piece about the Song of the Sea itself, and then I want to shift to talking more about Miriam and Miriam's song. So one of my favorite teachings about the Song of the Sea that we're going to look at more, we're going to sort of hear a different take on it when we look at Miriam's song. But one of my favorite teachings comes from the work of Aviva Zornberg, I brought some of Eva's Bromberg that we're going to read together. If you don't know her work, she's an amazing interpreter of Torah text. She comes from a literary psychoanalytic perspective and is an amazing reader of text. And sort of bringing together her sense of sort of the best of psychoanalytic tradition with a really also rich understanding of the midrashic tradition and the rabbinic tradition of interpreting text. So she writes about the timing of the singing of the song, because when you read the flow of the text of Torah, it seems as if what happened was that the people first cross the sea, and then once they're on dry land on the other side, they sing this song. But through a set of textual interpretations that I'm not going to get into more than to say that, there are commentators who actually argue that this is a song that was sung as the people were walking through the sea. And it's this amazing shift to think about what it means to sing this victory song, right? We've triumphed and they're all dead. When you're already on the other side and you're safe and you're sort of remembering, maybe it's traumatic, maybe it's victorious, maybe it's whatever, then to imagine what it would be to sing this song as you're walking through with a wall of water on one side and a wall of water on the other. And so there's this whole sense of what does it mean to sing preemptive victory song? So I want to give you one just personal example of this in my own life, because I think it really shifts sort of our whole sense of what this song is for. If we think of it as something that carries us through rather than something that we use to celebrate after we're already on the other side. When I was writing my dissertation, those of you who have written dissertations or had to be around someone who was writing a dissertation can maybe relate. I actually, without ever having read about this before, took up a practice of preemptive victory song. I didn't call it that at the time, but I had a song that I would sing to myself sometimes. And it went like this. It's a song that I learned from John McCutcheon. I don't think he didn't write it though. I don't remember who wrote it, but it goes like this. Hallelujah, the great storm is over. Lift up your wings and fly. Hallelujah, the great storm is over. Lift up your wings and fly. So for me, that was really a way of imagining what it would be like to be on the other side of this hurdle in my own life, and the way that that can help us to make that journey. So when we talk about Miriam's song, we're going to talk about sort of another take on that as well. But even with this song, this longer Song of the Sea, there is this sort of minority voice tradition that says, you know, what does it mean to us if we imagine that this is actually something that was sung while we were walking through, as opposed to once we got to the other side. And as we move into talking now more about Miriam's song, I also want us to think about what this means in our own life, right? Especially at this time, right? When we are still in the middle of some very challenging times for so many of us and for so much of our society. You know, what might the song be that could serve that purpose in our own life, right? What do we imagine on the other side of the pandemic, of all of the other pieces of challenge in our lives right now, right? What might we imagine it might feel like to be there, right? This really sort of affective piece of allowing ourselves an opportunity to give ourselves a moment of having that sense of being through it, even while we're still in the middle of it. So I'm going to sort of shift gears now to look at Miriam's song, but I wanted to leave you with that interpretive possibility that certainly I've found quite uplifting in my life. Anything that anyone wants to say about the Song of the Sea before we move on to its lesser known cousin? Okay, here we go. So we're going back to the text itself. Let me get that screen back up. Okay, so here we are after our song, and we had these, yep, Mi Chamochas, there they are. So just after the song ends, we have this little almost snippet that, again, when we think about sort of how the Torah gets put together, and if we think of it as I tend to, right, as a bunch of oral traditions that someone or someone's, whether you believe it's through the hands of God or through human intelligence or some combination of the two, right, puts together into the text that we have now. Right after the Song of the Sea ends, and the text goes back to its regular layout in the scroll of the Torah itself, we have these amazing few verses. Someone want to read where it says, then Miriam the prophetess? Oh, I can't see any of you, so.
I'll read, Minna.
Thank you, Myra.
Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her in dance with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea.
Thank you. That's actually the end of it. That's the whole song. So her song is not even a whole verse. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Let me see if there's a way to put these two next to each other. So take in this verse here, right? Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea, right? Photocopy that in your mind, because we're about to go and compare it to the opening of what we can think of as Moses' song. If this is Miriam's song, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. We're going to zoom back up. Tell me what you notice about the difference between that and this opening line here. Similarities and differences. You put it in the chat or just unmute yourself and talk. Just that first line. It's inclusive, says Leah. Does everyone see what she means by that, right? So Moses says, Ashir al Adonai, I will sing to the Lord.
Right.
And Miriam says, Shiru Ladonai, which actually means is a command, is in the command form, right? In English, you all sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously.
Right.
So that distinction is a big part of what we're going to be talking about. That difference between Ashir Ladonai, I will sing to the Lord, and Shiru Ladonai, sing to the Lord. So that's one piece to think about. The other piece that's going to be in our text that we're going to look at is if you look at these next verses, they travel a bit and they find no water. And we're going to talk more about how Miriam comes to be associated with water, but she certainly is. And so I'm just going to read these verses. They came to Mara. So the word Mara means bitter. And you can also, we can hear that Miriam's name also has that same, those same consonants, that Miriam's name also has to do with, also could be interpreted as having to do with bitterness. Drink the water of Mara because it was bitter. That is why it was named Mara, right? So first of all, we've got this Mara, Mara, Mara all over this verse. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Okay, so that all is going to become an important also part of our story of Miriam and Miriam as a leader. Before we go on, though, I want to hear what you all already know or think of Miriam and who she was and what's her story. Let's tell a little bit of the story of Miriam as we know it. Myra, do you want to? Yes.
Just in terms of her relationship to the water, it's Miriam's well
Right.
that saves them. And there is this biblical story of the well that followed them as long as Miriam was alive and stopped. I wanted to go back to the idea, though, of the inclusiveness.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that Miriam is the inclusive one. You know, everybody do it. And Moses, and we always hear about Moses being the humblest man on earth. And yet the dichotomy here is really interesting. It's Moses who says, I can do it. And Miriam who says, we can all do it. And it's also interesting that we never talk about who is the humblest woman on earth. It's always the humblest man. So that's my Musar bit for today.
Right. Thank you. So, so first I want to say thank you for that. And also thank you, Myra, for bringing up the idea of Miriam's well. So this idea that there was a well of water that followed the people, and then when Miriam died, it disappeared, does not appear in Torah. Even though it is part of the story.
Yeah.
So there is this legend that Miriam had a well, and we're going to read some. We're going to read some texts about that, about Miriam's well. If any of you have engaged with the custom of having a cup of Miriam on your Seder table, in addition to the cup of Elijah, the cup of Miriam is a cup of water that sits on the Seder table to remember Miriam's well. And the way that the rabbis, we're going to look at some texts that talk about Miriam's well. So what I mean by that is that there's a sense that Miriam had a well, and everyone knows that Miriam had a well that followed her. And what's amazing is that we've carried this tradition with us, and we think of it as something that's in the Torah, even though it's not actually in the text. Like nowhere in the text does it say Miriam had a well and it followed the people. What does happen, and as you'll see from the text that we're going to look at, the place that the rabbis get this idea, or sort of what they use in the text to read in this legend of Miriam's well, is that after Miriam dies, immediately after she dies, the people complain that there's no water. And so this is used as the proof text for the idea that up until then, it must be that there was water whenever, as long as Miriam was alive, and that when she died, it disappeared. So clearly this sense of Miriam having a well is something that's been in the tradition for a very, very long time, even though it doesn't appear in the text of Torah itself. Just to give another example of something that many of us think is in Torah and is not, the story of Abraham smashing the idols in his father's idol store, fantastic, wonderful legend that our people has carried with us for generations, does not appear in Torah. You feel like you're reading a version that they left something out when you read and you don't find it in it, right? But so we do have these various traditions that are such strong midrashic traditions, such strong traditions of rabbinic interpretation, that we carry them with us as Torah, and I would say justifiably we carry them with us as Torah, even though they're not in the written text itself. And Miriam's well is one of those.
Go out.
Ruth has a hand, and Rivlin has a hand. Yes, Ruth, please.
To alert you and everyone that in a minute or so, we're going to take a little break for just 5 minutes or so. We want to stand up and stretch a little bit or get a cup of coffee or whatever, and then we will reconvene. But if just in a minute or so, if you want to bring this section to
Wonderful, wonderful, great. So I'm going to leave you on the cliffhanger that we're about to read some interesting texts,
Yes.
and hear some interesting song about Miriam and the timbrels. Someone else had a question about the timbrels. It was a great question, and so we're going to get right back to timbrels after this break.
Okay, taking a break.
She's very good.
She's
excellent.
brilliant. She's just brilliant.
You're just
She's
really, really
What?
interesting. Really,
We have her at
interesting.
least, we have a women's group. It's
Mhm.
not sisterhood, but it's
Mhm.
the Rosh Chodesh group. And she
I overheard Myra mentioning the Rosh Chodesh group. And we did not mention this earlier, but the Rosh Chodesh group is participating today as it's part of its monthly meeting. So we welcome Temple Adas Israel Rosh Chodesh group, and thank you for joining us today with your presence. Ready? All right.
I'm ready. Are we
Are we
ready?
ready? Okay.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. I imagine we will have some people joining us and, within the next, rejoining us within the next few minutes. I was just thinking that how nice it is when members of the community join us, because I recognize names and people that I haven't seen in a long time. So hello to Julie Ratner and lots of other folks whose names I don't see immediately. I see Barbara Kent. Is the baby around, Barbara?
I see the baby.
Where is the baby?
She's on Barbara.
Yes. Oh, there we are. Oh, there she is.
Is she the youngest member of our extended community?
Yes, that's baby Willow. Mazel tov. She looks wonderful.
Baby Willow has been involved in, I was just texting Julie, more Torah study, I think, in the first few days of life than any child, including my own. It's been, amazing. It's amazing. Well on our way.
Very nice.
Beautiful.
God bless. Okay.
So, you ready? Are you ready? I'm going to start with a song. I was going to say I'm going to start with a song that I'm not singing, but it sort of is a song that I'm singing. I'll tell you more about it. So I want to say that today, in addition to being many other wonderful things, today actually also happens to be the Yortzeit in the secular calendar of Debbie Friedman, Zichrona Livracha. Debbie Friedman, who wrote many wonderful songs, and for whom actually the cantorial school of the Reform movement has now been named. Such an important leader in song of the Reform movement and of the Jewish world. And among other beloved songs, Debbie Friedman wrote a song called Miriam's Song. I'll let's see, how do I do this? Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put the words of the song in the chat if I can do that, in case you want to follow along with them. And then I'm gonna share with you a video that was made by a lovely organization called Project Kesher. So Project Kesher does work, has women's, among many other things, has women's Torah study and women's Jewish study in the former Soviet Union, and with women from the former Soviet Union in the US and in Israel. And a year ago, in honor of Debbie Friedman's Yortzeit, and in honor of Pesach, and in honor of all of us looking for creative ways to connect with one another during the pandemic, Project Kesher made a video of Miriam's Song, which included the volunteers for Project Kesher's women's circles across the globe. And so you'll see in this video, you will catch a glimpse of me here in Jerusalem and some of us here in Jerusalem. But there are also folks in other countries as well. So let's see if I can play this for you. I think I need to, hold on, I need to do a new share. Oh no, are you all seeing the video?
You might want to actually go back out and then just click the, there's like two little tick boxes that say optimize for video and share sound. So if you come out of the screen share and then do it one more time, it should give you those options.
Okay, great. Optimize screen share for video clip. And what was the other one?
I think share sound is usually the way to do it.
Oh, share computer sound. Okay, hold on, it's asking me for. Want to share computer sound.
I don't think it's working properly.
Yeah.
Minna, do me a favor, just come out of the screen share altogether for a second.
Okay.
Okay, and then try going back into it.
Okay, hold on one sec. Let me pause the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So now when you go to screen share, just click those two boxes and then it should work as intended. We'll see.
Okay. We'll see.
Yeah, and if not, you can send me the link. I could try to do it on my end.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that preemptively, just to. Maybe that's what we should do since you know what you're doing. I'll send
You're giving me a little too much credit.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sending everyone the link.
Okay.
You can watch it on your own another time, and I'm gonna try. I'll try one more time. I'll try one more time.
Oh, you know what? Sorry, you will, because I don't think I've logged into Facebook here, and I, for the life of me, don't remember my password. So we'll go with you. It should work fine.
Okay.
Okay. So the only thing I could say is to just forget what I just told you and try it without the share sound thing and see if that works.
We hear it.
Took her timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her, just as she had planned. And Miriam was a weaver of unique variety. The tapestry she wore was one who sang our history. With every strand and every thread she crafted her delight. A woman touched with spirit, she dances toward the light. And the women dancing with their timbrels follow Miriam as she sang her song. Sing the songs to one whom we've exalted. Miriam and the women dancing there all night long. Danzavali женщины, Miriam Bazari.
When Miriam stood upon the shore and gazed across the sea, the wonder of this miracle she soon came to believe. Whoever thought the sea would part with an outstretched hand, and we would pass to freedom and march to the promised land.
And the women dancing with their timbrels follow Miriam as she sang her song. Sing the song to one whom we've exalted. Miriam and the women dancing there all night long.
Miriam
the prophet took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her, just as she had planned. And Miriam
So, oh, shush now, please. So I shared that mostly because I wanted you to get a sense of the way of certainly ways that we are able to take pieces of our own tradition that might have been ignored or passed over or not given a central place and use them in ways that are new and uplifting and used for creating the world that we want to live in. So that's one interpretation of Miriam's song, and also calling on the voice and the memory of Debbie Friedman, who herself was such an important voice of leadership through song. So thank you all for joining me in that viewing experience. I want us to have a chance to look at some texts about Miriam and her well. And so let's go back to, I need to get myself back to, hold on one second. Okay, here we are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share and show you what we're going to be doing. But then I'm going to share the link to this source sheet with you, so that when you go into your breakout rooms, you'll have access to it. Okay. So let me do that. So you're certainly welcome to either look at the chat or look at the screen share as you like. Let's see if this is the right one. Oh, something just disappeared. I don't know where it went. All right, can you all see my screen at this point? Yes, excellent. Okay, so the texts that we're going to be looking at are these two here. You know what I'm actually going to do? I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of a big chunk of texts, bunches of texts. And then when you're in your breakout room, you'll have some time to sort of decide what you want to do with your chevrutot, with your study partners there. So the two texts we have, one is, the first two are Hebrew text with the English below. This is from the Talmud, and this is from an older rabbinic commentary. And both of them talk about Miriam and the well, Miriam and her well. And then I also brought, oh, I thought I had trimmed this. Oh, well. And then I also brought a couple of excerpts from Aviva Zornberg's book, The Particulars of Rapture. So I brought them as links. You see where I am on the screen? You should just be able to click on the link. And it will take you to a PDF of the text. So these are two texts in English that are about the question of singing and also dancing. And again, so I'm going to stop share now. You'll have all of that in your in the link that I sent you. Okay, so so you all got the link to the, oh no, that's not what I meant to send. How come you didn't get the link to the source sheet? Hold on, let me correct that, just a moment. Okay, now you have a link to the source sheet. It's not the Facebook thing, it's the Sefaria thing. Sefaria, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Sefaria, Sefaria is an amazing online library of Jewish texts. It's got everything. It doesn't have everything, but it's got lots and lots and lots of wonderful things. And it also has good tools for pulling texts together and looking at them together. So that's what we've been using, and you'll see, hopefully it won't give you too much trouble. So my idea for the next I'm going to say 18 whole minutes of our time together, is to break you up into groups of 3 or 4, to look at both the Midrash text together and the Aviva Zornberg texts. You can decide amongst yourselves how much of it you want to do. It's not like a race to consume all of it at once. It's quite a bit of text. And the idea with this kind of learning is that we're really coming together with the text as a partner in our learning circle, which means that absolutely we want to sort of be listening to the voice of the text, but also listening to one another's voices. So you can sort of suss out with your group how much you want to be reading out loud. So there's certainly a tradition in this kind of learning of reading out loud and then taking a pause to reading a little chunk and then talking about it. And the basic idea is to be able to, as I said, have the text be in your learning, one of the members of your learning circle. And you've got all 4 of those texts. I will be here in the main room and available by chat if you have questions, and I may even pop into your breakout room. Any questions about the assignment before we go into breakout rooms? Okay, I am breaking you out. And off you go. If you have any problems, just chat me up, okay? Come back to the main room and chat me up. Here you go. Left.
There you have it.
All right. So where to begin? I would love to hear what struck you, what surprised you, what you wanted more of, what you wanted less of from the text, not from me. Oh, you could tell me that too. Yes, Arlene. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Trying.
You did.
Okay. Before we get into that, I would like to go back and ask you a question about the group that did the video that you were in about the Timbles. What struck me from the minute it started, and then it was so wonderful to see all these women from all over the world and how it was trying to be inclusive. And I wondered about the organization that made that and why there were no Jews with browner skin. It struck me immediately and bothered me terribly that everybody was so white when you were trying to.
Okay, so let me answer you, which is that the organization works with Jews from the former Soviet Union. That's who it works with. So the Jews in the former Soviet Union, by and large, are white Jews. I mean, people who we would perceive as white. I don't know how race plays out in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus, but that's the answer. That's who they work with. It's Jews from the former Soviet Union. Elaine.
I just wanted to say that when I was watching the video, I don't know if it was the same one, but there was a woman in focus right in front of the microphone only who appeared to be a woman of color.
Yes.
And who figured prominently in the.
So they asked a number of musicians, myself included, who are not normally part of the organization and are not necessarily, although the first one was, from the former Soviet Union to participate. Okay, moving on to the text about Miriam.
Yes.
What did you, yes, Ruth.
Okay, we had a little trouble accessing it, but Dan was helpful, but we decided to, we were only able to read a portion of the Zornberg text about the circle dance. And, I was really glad we weren't able to read the whole thing, but I was really glad to see the beginning was very interesting. And we had a chance just to talk about it very briefly. The idea of the masculine as being linear, a kind of top down kind of teaching, which Moses did in Moses' song, and the feminist, which is a circle, and where everyone has an equal voice. And I was pleased I am pleased to note that in our women's Torah study, we use the facilitation model as you just did in the breakout groups, where everyone has a chance to participate in this in an equal way, should they wish to. And that's the kind of thing we do in women's Torah study as well. It's not a top-down teaching. There's a facilitator, and everyone has the opportunity to participate. And when we're not on Zoom, and we do this in Torah study regularly too, that Dan leads. When we're not on Zoom, we do sit in a around a seminar table, and we use that model as well.
Thank you. Yes, Marilyn Tetsky, and then Janet.
Yeah. Thanks to Dan, we were also able to get to the readings. It was fascinating. Not gonna. Let me just cancel that. Can't get it to cancel. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. We got to the three attributes, I guess you would call them, of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, which we found fascinating. Had not really been aware of what the cloud meant, so we did a little research on that, which was quite interesting as far as getting the people through the desert. But I'm going to let Sue Wartor talk about what she came up with the concept of the woman as the midwife, the metaphor that that surfaced in our discussion. Sue, are you there to pick up on that?
Can you unmute yourself, Sue?
Unmute, yes. I love the line, she had faith in what was not there. And the concept of midwifery then blew up for me, because it's a prophetic role, and the notion that we are midwifing the future. It was just a beautiful idea that had never occurred to me. I had never read that before.
Yeah. So I don't remember if Zornberg talks about it in the text that I gave you, because she talks about it extensively elsewhere in the book.
It's rather an awesome role.
Yes, absolutely. Whether she talks about the association between Miriam and her mother Yocheved with the Egyptian midwives. So the Egyptian midwives are the midwives who rebel against Pharaoh, and when Pharaoh asks the midwives to participate in killing any male children that are born to the Israelites, the midwives say, sorry, these Israelite women, they just give birth too quickly. We can't get there in time. And those midwives are actually, in some parts of a rabbinic tradition, even though they have their own names, Shifra and Pua, sometimes those midwives are read as if they are Yocheved and Miriam, Moses's mother and sister. So, yes. What else struck you? Yes, Janet. Unmute.
Okay. We only got the first two readings. That was it. We didn't get we couldn't get any more.
Okay, 2 was good. So what did you learn?
That was okay. Well, maybe Julie can talk about that. Julie Ratner, you want to talk about what we learned?
Oh,
you have to unmute, Julie.
Okay. I was thinking it was really interesting to listen. Warren read the piece for us. And while he was reading, I was thinking, and I didn't want to interrupt, it would have been interesting to go through this piece line by line, because there was so much in it. And I can't remember what I said when we talked, but what struck me in listening to you talk now about Shifra and Pua is how water is so significant in this. When you think about birth and midwives, in the whole birthing process, the baby is in a sack of water, right? When we're pregnant, the baby is in water. We nourish the baby through the umbilical cord, and the baby is in water. When Miriam saves Moses' life and takes him and puts him in the Nile River, he's in water. Water has been such a part of Miriam's life that when the well follows him, I'm not exactly sure of the connection, but I think it must be significant that Miriam put Moses in the Nile River, and then there's a well that follows through them. So that was one thing that we point out. The other is that I think in the reading of the Talmud section, God figure is very ever present in that. And I took it as, that this happened because of God with an outstretched arm, and that in reading this, and even Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, they're there because of God in a way, it's their merit that God recognizes. So that God plays a very forceful role in this. And maybe that's part of the teaching, to recognize that this wasn't an accident and there was a stronger, mightier hand, God's hand, that led us out, that led the Israelites out. So that was some of what I talked about in my part that I contributed to our group.
Okay, thank you. Other folks who want to join in? Elaine. Oh, let's unmute. You need to unmute.
Sorry. Some other thoughts I had, and again, I don't know if we had the exact correct text, but I was thinking that there was a comment about the future being incipient in the present. And I was thinking how that's the state of a pregnant woman, is exactly that. And so therefore the huge importance of women in the future. And I also had this visual thought, kind of, when the song was talking about before the drowning of the Egyptians, when the Jews are going through the parted sea, that was like a birth canal, like a metaphor for a birth canal.
Yeah.
And that, I just found that so moving, having never thought of it that way before.
Yeah.
And I was in a group with Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. And I don't know if this was something we read when we were in our little group together, or something you mentioned right before the breakout, but that mentioning of singing the bitterness into a different place. I just, when I read that line, I thought the synagogue has to have a chorus. We must. If music can be so transformative in raising our voices together. My mother just passed away, and before she passed away, my mother used to love to attend people's seders if they sang a lot. She thought they were so much better. And you put a tambourine in her hand, and just the sight of it filled her with joy. And I know this is just one teeny weeny aspect of this whole, section, but just the focus on the power of raising our voices together. That was almost overwhelming for me.
Myra, did you want to? Yeah. Last chance to raise your voice. If you have anything else you'd like to say, and then I'm gonna try to bring us home. Yes. Oh wait. Yes, Myra, and then yeah. Wait, you got to unmute.
I just wanted to follow up on what Lori said. To me, that's what makes our synagogue so special, is the amount of singing that we do. That we practically sing our way through the entire service. And everybody participates. And I wait longingly for when we can also on Friday evenings dance again, as we do as part of the service. So if you want to see communal singing, if you want to see a community raise their voice in song, this is the place to be.
Yeah. So yes, Diane.
Okay, so I wanted to follow up on that, on how important it is for music. It really binds us together like no other way that I know of, because when you're singing with somebody else with a joyous voice, you can't be unhappy, you can't be sad at that time. You're really participating in a joyful way. And I miss services also because on Friday nights we always really sing a lot. And it's hard when you're watching it on Zoom. It's not quite the same, but it's just such a joyful feeling to be singing together.
Yeah.
So I want to, again, just really thank you all for your voices, even if we can't actually sing together. And just to really lift up this sense, both of I would say sort of three different points that feel important to me and connected with this. One is this question of, where do they get the timbrels from? And I don't know how many of you got to this part of Zornberg's piece, but she writes about this idea that they brought the timbrels with them because they anticipated needing them, right? That they were anticipating song. And so to me, that's when I read that text, for me, it was an even more wonderful idea of that preemptive song than the preemptive victory song of the first of Moses's song, right? Where here, this sense that you bring the instruments of celebration along with you because you anticipate that they will be needed, and so just and that you bring the instruments of celebration with you, that you do it in a circle, and that when we invite people into song, we do that by using that. For me, really, the model of Miriam is that model of using our own voices to invite other people into song, and whether that's metaphorical in terms of using our own power to create larger circles of belonging for others, or whether it's the actual physical act of how we lead singing. And I think, that part of what, just to sort of touch back to Debbie Friedman, that part of what made her work so revolutionary, first in the Reform movement and then rippling out from there, was that real shift, right? To using her voice, not only as an instrument of performance, but as an instrument of invitation. That we see sort of rooted in this model of Miriam style leadership. That certainly is what I aspire to. So again, thank you, Leah and Dan and Ruth and everyone who brought us together today. I'm really delighted to have been able to be home with you, even though I know some of you are also far flung. And yes, thanks so much for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Minna.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Kol hakavod.
Yes.
Thank you. Toda rabah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Regard.
So now you have the link also to those texts. If you have any trouble accessing them or have any other questions, please do reach out to me. I'm always happy to continue our conversations.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Miriam.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Good to see you.
Toda rabah.
See you guys.
In regard.
Good.